Peace, family. Welcome back to the channel. In this one, I want to go over the Confiscation Act and go over what the contraband was and the different aspects of the Contraband Act. Because we talked about the 40 acres and a mule and on how that land became basically in black people's hand. And we also talked about how slavery ended and how those black people came into the Union lines. But what I want to do is go over the acts that set up this stuff. But it says the Confiscation Act was a law passed by the United States Congress during the Civil War with the intentions on freeing the slaves still held by the Confederate forces in the South. The Confiscation Act of 1861 authorized the confiscation of any Confederate property by the Union forces. Property included slaves. This meant that all slaves that fought or worked for the Confederate military were confiscated whenever court proceedings condemned them as property used to support the rebellion. So this is what we have to look at. Our ancestors was considered property that the South was using to support their rebellion. They wasn't viewed as people who needed human rights or refugees who need to be saved or whatever this human rights crisis. No, it was about the South using human labor to fund their rebellion. That's all it was about. So our ancestors never stopped being property, as we will get into, because they came under Union lines as property. The bill passed in the United States House of Representatives 60 to 48 and in the Senate 24 to 11. The act was signed into law by President Lincoln on August the 6th, 1861. Now, the thing that I want to point out is 1861 is 3 years after the supposed end of the Third Seminole War. The Seminoles war with the United States all the way from the War of 1812 to 1858, a couple years before the beginning of the Civil War. And that's something that we can't erase from history. Because let's say they were taking all these so-called runaway Seminoles back to the plantations. All these people had a warrior spirit. Now they tasted freedom. But we'll get into that in another video. The Confiscation Act of 1862 was passed on July 17, 1862. It stated that any Confederate official, military, or civilian who did not surrender within 60 days of the act passage would have their slaves freed in criminal proceedings. However, this act was only applicable to Confederate areas that had already been occupied by the Union. So during this time, they didn't even have a problem with you keeping your slaves if you surrendered. It only became an issue once these people didn't surrender. So now they wanted to hit them in their pocket. But this is the history you don't really hear about, though. This is the Confiscation Act. The Confiscation Act took contraband, which we about to get into now. So it says contraband was a term commonly used in the United States military during the American Civil War to describe the new status for certain escaped slaves or those who had affiliated with the Union forces. So this is contraband. In 1861, the Union Army and the United States Congress determined that the U.S. would no longer return escaped slaves who went to Union lines and classified them as contraband of war. So at first, I guess if you was coming across the line, they was sending you back. But now it says that they was classified as contraband of war or captured enemy property. So let's say that they went to a Union plantation and they took the fields, they took the house, they took the grain storages or whatever. That was property. They was taking this property because this property was supporting the war. But now the act went to people. It went to humans. The humans were considered property of the South. They used many as labor to support the Union efforts and soon began to pay them wages. So at first they was just using them as slaves as well. It was just the change of the master. Then they started paying them wages. But who knows if they did that or not. The former slaves set up camps near Union forces, and the Army held, support, and educated both adults and children amongst the refugees. So now they're trying to say that these people are refugees, even though it just told us that these people was property. So now they're trying to play. This is what you call whitewashing and white-splaining history, because this is from white sources. Thousands of men from the camp enlisted in the U.S. United States colored troops when recruitment started in 1863. At the end of the war, more than 100 contraband camps existed in the South, including the Freedmen's Colony of Roanoke Island, where 3,500 former slaves worked to develop a self-sufficient community. So another video I think I'm going to do is about these contraband camps, because a lot of these contraband camps were like internment camps, and they got one called the Punch Bowl, where they talk about people were starving in there and mass burials and all of this stuff. But this is my last slide on here, but it says free or state property. This is one from my earliest slideshow presentation. It was called Juneteenth. Who are those slaves? But with respect to slaves, the act authorized court proceedings to strip their owners of any further claim to them, but did not clarify whether the slaves were free. As a result of this ambiguity, the slaves came under Union lines as property in care of the United States government. In response to the situation, General David Hunter, the Union Army military commander of Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida, issued General Order Number 11 on May 9, 1862, freeing all slaves in the area under his command. Upon hearing Hunter's action, 1 week later, Lincoln immediately, now this is the trip, so it took a week. These people were free, and it goes as far as saying that they were free forever, but it says Lincoln immediately countermanded the order, thus returning the slaves to their former status as property in the care of the federal government. So to this day, right now, African Americans are property in care of the federal government. They never stop being property. No law in the United States. Because why would Lincoln have to stop this dude from doing that and then come back to do a law for something that was already in effect? It just never happened. What the Civil War did was take black people from the property of individual slaveholders in the states and made them federal government property, basically wards of the federal government. And that's what I wanted to show you. Our people came into Union property as confiscated contraband. They're still confiscated contraband. That's why we have no self-autonomy. We have no rulership of our own beings. And everything we do, even if we get black people elected, they come and become white politicians. And now they can't do nothing for black people, supposedly. But it's a Free Black Society presentation. Know how your ancestors got here. Know about laws that affected you, because black people went through stuff everywhere. But in North America, black people have to learn what they went through and how they got here specifically, because we are new people. But peace, family.